show you today is how to monitor to see that what we did was actually worth anything. So is it successful or not? So there's all different ways to do monitoring. There's different methods that have been developed, scientific methods, and one of them is using this thing called a quadrat. So if you end up doing a report on this and go home and type it into Word, it'll tell you typed it wrong, because quadrat is a science word. It thinks you meant quadrant, which is just one of the corners. So one of the standards for doing this stuff is called herbaceous, right? So yeah, herbaceous means it's like no wood, and then you got woody stuff like the mangroves, whatever. So we're gonna look at I assume we're gonna look at the herbaceous part. So typical for herbaceous studies is you do a 1 meter by 1 meter quadrat. And since we're doing science, it's all meters and whatnots. And you define your study area. So your study area is this side of the shoreline here. And then two ways to find out where your quadrats go. One is random, and that's if you're going to get a lot of samples and have to do all these statistics and all that stuff, and the things that when you hear on the news about the statistics showed this, they had a whole bunch of samples and they randomly figured out where to measure everything. The other thing you can do if you're going to really just want to watch small areas, you can do systematic. So you can just do one every 20 feet, and then you got a better idea of like what's going on there. So I'll let you guys figure out how you do that part. But once you get to a spot, you lay down your quadrat, and then what you do is you pretend, and some of them we actually do this. Sometimes we'll have strings lined up all back and forth. So there's 100 squares in here. So there's 100 squares that makes it really easy to figure out what we're gonna call percent cover. So if we look at this little, anybody know what this guy is?
Dollarweed?
Yep, dollarweed. They probably fertilize here, I bet.
Probably.
So at home, if you don't fertilize, this can just go right in your salad. So here, I don't know. I mean, thing is with fertilizer, you can't really always taste it. So, but I don't know. It doesn't taste bad. It tastes like dollarweed, but won't do that on the camera. All right. So what we do here is we look at, okay, we have dollarweed, and then we look at, if I pretend that there's all these little squares in here, how many of these squares have dollarweed in it? Well, looks like most of the squares have dollarweed in it. So, you know, if I look at any one section, let's look at this square right here, I'd say like it's half of this is dollarweed and half of this is other plants. And the other thing that you see is like this dollarweed is growing here, but then this grass is growing underneath it. So you're gonna have, when you talk about percent cover, you're gonna have more than 100% in here because everything is overlaying itself. So here, we stand over it, and you guys come over here and we'll just pretend that you're actually doing it. So you just sort of stand here and you go, okay, let's see, there's a line there, and it's like, that's like 9 of those 10 squares would have it. You know, if I go back and forth, it's like, overall I'd say like 80% of this is probably covered in dollarweed. So you have a data sheet in your hand and you go, okay, dollarweed, 80%. And then you go on and find the next plant. All right, the next plant is this guy right here, which is what this whole lawn is. Anybody know this guy right here? What this whole entire lawn is made of?
St. Augustine.
St. Augustine, yep. And St. Augustine is just like the dollarweed. It's like pretty much the whole thing. I mean, there's like a little bit missing in a couple spots, but I almost don't see any square that doesn't have it. So, I'd say 90% of it is dollarweed. So we have the dominant things, and then if you're getting really technical, then you start looking around and you go, all right, well, do we have any other, yep, see? And the neat thing about doing this stuff is you find things that you wouldn't have found if you weren't doing this. So like, we get in here and look, we got these little pony's feet in here, which you'll know pony's feet in your yard because they get the little sticky parts, and they'll stick to your socks and the hairs on your leg and everything. So we got a little bit of that, and then what you do is you just go through and you just look around, you know, bit by bit, and just see what else you can find. Here's some more stuff that we hadn't seen before. So like, you know, this looks different than the St. Augustine grass. And then this is where you realize, holy cow, you gotta like spend a lot of time looking at plants before you can just start picking out all these different weird things that are in here. So we got a little sedge that's growing in here and so on. And that's what you do. Typically the way that we do it is I'll say all the names of all the things I see in here, and then Amber will record all the names, and then she'll go back to the beginning of the list and say a name, and then I'll figure out the percent cover. And that's kind of the method. And then the same thing applies if we do this in the water. It's exactly the same deal. You set it down in the water, and you look at how much of it is bare sand, how much of it is oyster shell, how much of it is living oyster shell, and you do the same kind of cover. And that's the basis of how you do this aerial. And then you go back to the same spot, or you just remeasure the same site year after year, and then you see like what's my, you know, what happened to the species over time. And hopefully what we see here is over time we get less weeds and more of the stuff that we planted. So.
Can you talk a little bit about what we planted here?
Yep, so let's head over here. We'll go down here. There's a little bit of shade down here.